and Economics. Today, we will be diving into the topic, the state of the economy. And today we have Gabriel Carter, we have Larry Kennedy, Prof. Larry Kennedy, right? And
Yeah, Larry is good.
myself, Alex Cuffy, aka 9 with a 9, to deliberate on the the State of the Nation address vis-a-vis what is actually continuing in the Liberia economy. Welcome to everybody in cyberspace, all our viewers, and all those who will be contributing to this show today and those who will be watching it later on. Gentlemen, welcome.
Thanks, Alex. Hey, Gabriel, how are you?
Larry, thank you for joining us. Alex, thank you. It's a pleasure being here again. I think last week we actually had a conflicting schedule, so we couldn't do the show. So for those of you who actually were expecting us, we apologize for not being here. But we're here today. We're here. We have about an hour 30 to talk about the state of the economy. All right. This is actually going off of the recent State of the Nation from the president, which was the fifth State of the Nation since this administration. There was a lot of things that was said in that State of the Nation. There was a lot of figures put out. There was a lot of projections in terms of cataloging that administration's uh, agenda, what they have achieved, what they want to do, that were put out. But I think for some of us here in the we want to look at this thing from a finance and economic side. We want to look at the economic side because believe it or not, everything that happens in your life is impacted by economics. So we want to break that down into bits and pieces and make you understand it from a what I call the purview of the average citizen of Liberia. So we invited Professor Larry Kennedy to join us to help us do that, and we hope you stick with us for an hour, and we have a lot of questions, and we will delve into that. Again, wherever you are, take a minute, just share the podcast and invite others to join us. Thank you.
Yes, Prof, can you give you a little highlight of yourself? I know the people know you.
So just briefly, so I do teach finance economics, some technical courses like information systems. I worked in investment banking for, I'm still in finance and banking right now, but I was working with an investment bank on Wall Street for a little over 30 years. And I've been doing this stuff for a very, very long time. And it's always good to have these conversations because when you look in Africa, when you look at all the countries in Africa, you should always ask yourself, with all the resources we have in Africa, why is it that so many countries are poor? Why is it that, and what can we possibly do to get out of this poverty? Look at the resources in Liberia. Liberia is extremely rich in resources compared to other places like Burkina Faso, Hong Kong, Singapore. But why is it year over year over year, we still don't seem to be moving forward? So let's discuss it. I mean, I've spent time doing research on those two fundamental questions. Why is it that Liberia is so poor? And what can we do as citizens? What can we possibly do to get us out of this poverty? Because the same thing is happening over the poorest country in the Western Hemisphere, Haiti. With all the rich countries surrounding Haiti, Haiti has been poor for so many years. Why? Those are the things that we need to be asking ourselves. And we'll take a look at the president's annual message. We'll dive into it. And if you have the ability to bring a copy of the annual message so you can look at it, because I don't want you to believe that what Alex is saying or what Gabriel is saying is just made up stuff. I think it's important to have a copy of it in front of you. And I would point out specific things in the annual message that you would take a step back and ask yourself, where did they get these numbers from? So we'll talk about that.
Yeah, thank you, Larry. So, what the premise of our discussion today is the state of the nation address, according to Constitution, I think it's Article 54. The president addresses the nation. Say it's a year in review. We normally call it the State of the Nation address, and we refer to it as the SONA. The president gave that, I think by Constitution, is every third working Monday in January. So the president come and give that address to the national legislature at the Capitol building. So that happened on the 24th of January, and the president pointed out some good things. Basically, in that report, he declared that he has managed to keep the economy stable and expanded the economy by 3.6%, which is a nominal value of 300 million in 2021. Yeah, so he went on to say that the 3.6% growth of the economy in 2021 was an improvement from the negative 3% in 2020, as 2020 was heavily struck by the corona pandemic. Because you will see that, okay, the economy is supposed to grew in by 3.6% in 2021. How come it went negative in 2020? According to the president, the reason is because of the corona pandemic. On the other hand, the president also stated that inflation was reduced to less than 6% in November of 2020, which is down from 13.1% as at December 2020. So, and then the president also went on in part of his speech. He also talked about the scorecard and that efforts that were being made. So I believe that on that scorecard we feel inflation. So with these kind of numbers, we will see that maybe Liberia is poised to pass the next scorecard. However, I mean, despite all these positive things that were said by the government, 2 days after, front page article had a report. I think I'm hearing myself. There's an echo. Can you guys put yourself on mute?
Let me see if I can use my headphones just in case.
Yeah. Go ahead.
In the meantime, you can put yourself on mute.
Go ahead. We can hear you.
Yeah. So in the meantime, there's 2 days after, there's a front page Africa news story that quoted a study of the second edition of the Economic Update of Liberia, released in November 2021 by the World Bank. That report by the World Bank painted a contrary story. Yeah, so while the president painted this Bloomsome story about the economy, and quoting IMF, the World Bank, and all these international partners, and then one of the standard reports from one of the international partners, specifically the World Bank, had this economic update on Liberia that painted a different story. So this is something that we wanted to go into on this show to see what is said by the president versus what's the reality on the ground. Somebody would say trickle-down effect, but sometimes, yes, when economy is improving, you see that, yes, on the macro level, the economy is improving, and sometimes it doesn't trickle down to the ordinary people. That's a different situation. But when a picture is being printed that the macroeconomic is improving, and then there's a contrary picture that says, no, wait a minute, you're not improving as you stated. then there's a different thing. Even before we come to the fact that the improvement in the economy is trickling down to the people. Dr. Larry, what do you say about that? What did you make of this the speech? Let's speak about it. Let's leave the economics for a moment. Let's speak about the general speech. How did you see? I think it was 2 hours and 35 minutes. Let's talk about the optics. Let's talk about the content. Before we come to the content, let's talk about the optics of the entire speech.
The entire speech, I'll probably grade it maybe a B minus.
Mm-hmm.
I would grade it a B minus for several things. So and I'm kind of hesitant because, when you're dealing with numbers, it's always good to have accurate data, right? If you want people to believe that what you're saying, you need to refer them over to something that they can look at and say, this is accurate. For example, on page 15 of the president's speech, I want you to listen to this carefully, and I'm going to read it. I kind of jotted it down so I don't mess it up. I'm going to read what he said, and then we can talk about it. He said, I can proudly report to you that the number of commercial farms and agribusinesses more than significantly increased from 77 in 2021 to 164 in 2022. Listen to that. So at the end of 2021, the number of commercial farms and agribusiness was at around 77. 2022 just started. Are you trying to tell me that in roughly 3 weeks in 2022, it has increased to 164? It doesn't make any sense. So right off the top, it's telling me that there's inaccurate data in what he's saying. I can't trust the data because right off the top, I know they're not giving us accurate numbers. There's no way they could have increased the number of commercial farms and agribusiness by double what it was in 2021 in under 3 weeks. Some people might say, oh, it was just a miss. Well, you can't have mistypes in an annual message. You can't have that. I can take you over to another page where he compared the total growth, the GDP for 2020. Mm-hmm. He gave one amount, but when you look at the central bank report, it gives a completely different amount. So I don't trust anything they're saying in that annual message because just a quick look give me 2 instances of where the numbers just don't add up, right? So then we can start looking at some other things in the report. We can start touching on other things in the report. For example, one of the major challenges in any economy is creating jobs. Right. Well, how many times did the president mention the word jobs in the annual message? 0, none, nada, nil, never mentioned at all. How many times did he mention things like education? Great, he mentioned it 15 times. But a lot of the programs he talked about in education, these were international development programs. They weren't programs that they put together. Mm-hmm. How many times did he mention corruption? Twice. Now, when we look at the data in terms of what led to the civil war in Liberia, we know corruption was number 1. There were some other issues. We can go back historically and look since the dawn of Liberia and say, okay, there was some tribalistic stuff going on as well. But corruption has always been that one major issue in Liberia. How many times did we talk about issues in resolving corruption? Twice it was mentioned in the annual message. I give the president credit for putting forth a bill to kind of empower LACC to do something a little bit more. So rule of law, for example, we look at the rule of law and the MCC compact on the MCC scorecard. How many times did he mention the rule of law in the annual message? 0, nil, never mention it. We know another issue in Liberia is the whole incidence of rape. The president called himself feminist in chief. How many times did he talk about or put forth a social program to address rape? Nothing. So we can look at the policy side on the fiscal side and say, okay, the president mentioned that the economy was stable. Well, the economy isn't stable. You can have 3 negative downturn in economic growth, and then 1 year where the World Bank is saying, or the IMF is saying your economy is going to grow. Then you say you have a stable economy. No. Your economy is not creating enough jobs to meet the growth rate in your population as well. It's not stable. So we'll get into each segment. I don't want to take too much time, but we'll get into each segment. We'll talk about agriculture. We'll talk about jobs. We'll talk about education, healthcare, rule of law. And then the whole climate, the whole political landscape is so, like I mentioned to Anthony one time, it's like Mortal Kombat. People are just ripping each other apart. We don't seem to be coming together to try to solve the big, hairy, audacious issues in the country. We all seem to be nitpicking, hitting each other hard. You mentioned Cummings' name, everybody fly off the handle. You mentioned JMB name, people go crazy. You mentioned George Weah, they want to send the cyber unit after you. It's insane. So, we'll talk about it, bro.
Gabriel, I have my own view on the optics. What do you make of just the surrounding the optics, the whole thing leading to the speech itself, the timing and all that stuff?
I think if you want to look at the optics, I think I actually stopped watching the speech because of the way it was being read. I had to read it. I had to watch it over because we had to do this. That's what made me watch it. But I don't think anybody with, I don't, if it was cringing to watch it, right? It was cringing because it felt like a recital. It felt like a recital, right? That's on the recitation part of it, the delivery. In terms of the content that were, some of the, cataloging of his accomplishment that he talked about in his speech, I just think, not just think, they're contrary to the reality of what is happening in the country. He talked about inflation's coming down to 6% from 13%. And while we just had the recent MCC scorecard, we feel inflation. So, I mean, where are you going with that, right? He even talked about trying to go, hold on one second. I think I documented this thing here because I spent hours watching this thing, right? He talked about, the coming years, you want to focus on agriculture by 23%, and human capital development, social protection, right? That is true. If you're reading that, if you're looking at that as a average citizen in a country, you would think this is excitement. But I would refer you to the budget. Where in the budget they didn't make that intentional to say, okay, what he's saying in his speech here correlate with what is his intentionality is in the budget. There is nowhere. And what makes that so evident, right after the speech, I think the same World Bank report that you're talking about, UNDP Liberia put out another report. 51% of the population in Liberia face poverty and inequality, right? That is within the enclave of Monrovia. Now, if you go outside of the rural area, that expands to 72%. Right.
So it's just not the World Bank alone; it's also the UNDP.
As the UNDP put out another report, right? Was 175 out of 189 on the Human Development Index. Human Development Index meaning the level of schooling, life expectancy, the per capita income in a country, right? So we are failing all of these things, and then you look at that, and the president come before you and trying to catalog all of these things that are not happening. And as I said, we're not looking at this speech from the purview of you and I. We are okay, or Larry, or anybody else. We're looking at this from the perspective or the purview of the average citizen in Liberia. And that paints a contrary picture that is a light years from what they're trying to paint here. Thank you.
Yeah, I mean,
can I just say something real quick, Alex?
Yeah, go ahead.
Just 30 seconds. I want to kind of piggyback off what Gabriel just said. It's so important because you see, when you're saying the economy is growing at 3.2 to 3.6%, and then the UNDP puts out data saying that the poverty in the country, the number of people that fell into poverty, is growing. And the reason being, the population is increasing at a rate of, we have one of the highest population growth rate in the world, one of the highest, right? It's growing at around 2.7%. So the number of people that are being born in Liberia right now, it's growing at a rate of 2.7%, but we're only reducing poverty by 0.09%. So we're not keeping up. We're not keeping up with the population growth rate and the growth of the economy. There's a Yale professor named Arthur Okun. Of course, he shares the last name like my papi, William Okun. Arthur Okun has a formula out there that says your economy needs to grow at least at 4% just to reduce unemployment by 1%. Ask the government what is the unemployment rate. They don't know. They're guessing. They don't have a data warehouse to tell you how many people or how many jobs they created. These are all the fundamental things that need to be done before you can come out and say, oh, you have a stable economy. You don't have a stable economy. Your economy is all over the place. The central bank doesn't have a true macro. They don't have a true monetary policy to create jobs. Right now, they're scrambling all over the place. But let me swing it back over to you, Alex.
Yeah, that's a great input. But let me look at the update. I think the speech itself was 2 hours and 35 minutes, right? That's the longest so far. I think the longest before this one was by Ellen, I think, at some point. 1 hour and 40 something minutes or so. So, but what I think was that this speech and every other thing, looking at the budget, looking at everything, was the start of a campaign. So if you look at the speech, the speech is like I'm launching my campaign here for
That's
2023.
exactly what it was. Yeah.
Right? I mean, take it or leave it, Weah is not an orator. No, I mean, not everybody is an orator, right? But I think they did a little injustice to him by making his speech too long. So the guy is not an orator. He's not an Obama or it's like I think George Bush or something. Yeah. So he's not an orator, and he's not this reading guy. The guy during his inauguration, he said, "Don't." I think I'm not quoting it too right, but he said, "Don't look at my eloquence, but look at the content or whatever, my behavior or whatever."
Something in that line.
Yeah. So he says, look at the substance of my action and then look at my oratory ability. So if I'm writing stuff for him, if I was in those shoes who were writing stuff for him, I would try to compact it and make it more, subject matter related and make it short as much as possible. 1 hour, 15 minutes is too long. So it was too long, and the guy, but overall, I think like Larry said, he drove through it. And then the whole scenery was managed properly, and of course they had the this time they didn't take the CDC or whatever cheering squad, but some of the officials were there, were clapping, even if he said something that was contrary, they were clapping, and they had to do that because to cheer the guy on. So the second time the guy went dim and it was tough, and towards the end he tried to redeem himself. So generally the scenery was good. They managed the scenery very well. The delivery was kind of clumsy because of the length of the speech and the fact that the guy is not the orator. Naturally, he's not an orator. So obviously, you give me a long speech, you expect that to happen. He's sweating and all that stuff. So, but we'll come to the content, and I will comment on the content. Larry has already started the content, but I like to, because the president gave a speech, which painted a bright picture,
rosy
picture, right? And if you're setting up yourself for a campaign, why you're the opposition, you're still fighting among yourself. You're still bringing yourself down, and the president has to take the stage. He has to steal the stage, right? And that's exactly what he's doing. So, but again, we got to look at the content. Then Front Page Africa comes. If you give me a chance, maybe I could just read the Front Page Africa article, just to give you some context. Larry, if you allow me.
Well,
yeah, a snapshot of it, abstract. Maybe skim through it.
So he said the thing was so he said the hidden side of the economy, that's so he said in his fifth annual SONA, George Weah painted blossom picture of the country's 2021 economy. He said that he has managed to keep the economy stable and expanded the economy by 3.6%, a nominal value of 300 million in 2021. He went on to say that the 3.6% growth of the economy in 2021 was an improvement from the negative 3% in 2020, as that year was heavily struck by the corona pandemic. Inflation was reduced to less than 6% in November 2021 from 13% in December 2020. Okay, the improvement in the economy performance were due to improvement in the coordination between monetary and fiscal policies with the aid of the International Monetary Fund support to the Central Bank of Liberia. We have stated that, and I quote, "We have remained committed to the independence and autonomy of the Central Bank of Liberia in support of economic reforms for a stable economy. Although the year under review was challenging for the economy, my government was fully supportive of policy implementation from the CBL that have kept the recovery of our economy on course." He also outlined that during the year under review, his administration was successful in increasing the gross international reserve of Liberia to more than 600 million, representing more than 4 months of import of goods and services in compliance with ECOWAS convergence target. So this is something that we need to review. So we are also stated that based, and I quote, "based on the sound management and good performance of our economy, Liberia received $345.3 million US in August 2021 under the General Special Drawing Right allocation to IMF members." Now, despite
Everybody gets that money.
So despite all this stuff, then comes this report. So it's kind of it's kind of a little bit tough, right? So
Let's unpack that.
It says that according to the report, despite the recovery and lower inflation, extreme poverty in Liberia increased in 2021. According to the World Bank projection, the prevalence of extreme poverty has increased since the Ebola epidemic in 2014 and is estimated at 51.0% in 2020, up from 38.6% in 2014. Now, let me read this last part. It's interestingly, right? The report, among other things, indicated that most Liberians lack access to good jobs that provide sustainable earnings.
We don't even have jobs.
3 out of 4 of those in the labor force are self-employed. 36% of all employees or employment in agriculture or non-agricultural activities, almost 40%. So if you add 36 plus 40, that's 76%. So therefore, it says that therefore only 20% of workers are in wage employment, which tend to provide higher and more stable earnings. So basically, at least 80% of your citizenry, they are vulnerably employed. And only about 20% is stably employed. That's it. That's the report.
I think the first thing we need to do is to define
Africa story.
Yeah, I think the first thing we need to do is to kind of define what economic stability means, because the people need to understand when the president says the economy is stable, what does that mean? Well, an economy is stable if you have consistent growth over a number of years and you have low inflation. In the US, for example, the US tried to keep inflation at around 2.25%. But the fact that inflation is about to hit around 4%, which is going to be the highest it's ever hit in like 39 years, people are kind of worrisome. But look at Liberia. And let's go further into the definition of stability. Mm-hmm. So you need to have increased productivity. And productivity means that goods and services produced in a country needs to grow, needs to increase year over year. You need to show some effectiveness in terms of how effective the government is. Now, you can go to the MCC report card and you can see from 2020 to 2021 whether the government has been effective, whether they passed or failed in that. So economic stability looks at year over year improvement in goods and services, growth in goods and services, year over year, lowering your unemployment rate, the use of technology. So there's a number of factors in there. So then you ask yourself the question, is the economy growing year over year? Over the past 4 years, has the economy grown consistently? No, it hasn't grown consistently. They started blaming the fall in the economic growth on COVID when COVID hit Liberia in March of 2020. What happened in 2018? In 2018, the economy in Sierra Leone was growing. We can't say, oh, because in 2018, Liberia was still suffering from Ebola. Well, if we look at the Ebola countries like Guinea and Sierra Leone, the economy in 2018 grew. So what happened to the economy in Liberia? It fell in 2018. We can't blame Ebola. 2019, it fell. We can't blame COVID. COVID didn't hit until March of 2020. So what happens now? Your economy is not stable. Your monetary policy rate, and I don't want to get too technical because I know the CBL just reduced it by 500 basis points, but that is kind of nonsense. I'm not going to take that route. Bottom line is your economy is not stable. On the issue of job, 54% of your population, well, not 54%, a little over 60% of your population is between the age of 15 to 54. Mm-hmm. There's a huge opportunity in terms of tourism. 1 out of every 9 jobs is created in tourism. 23% of all of the jobs out there in the world is in tourism. We have the ability to create jobs in tourism, but can we do that? You can't do tourism if you don't have good security in the country. Great, the U.S. State Department kind of show an improvement on when you're traveling to Liberia. They kind of show that, hey, Liberia have moved down from a level 3 to a level 2, showing some improvement. But there's a high incidence of crime in Liberia.
Yeah, that was left out. It was never mentioned.
It was never mentioned, the security sector. So, you know, your economy is not stable. I mean, sure, the economy grew 3.2 to 3.6% in 2021. But that's the classic definition of growth without development, because almost 300,000 people fell into poverty. Like Gabriel said early on, it's around 70 to 72% of the people in the rural community that are poorer today. They don't have access to clean drinking water. They don't have access to electricity. They don't have access to all that stuff, despite the fact that we have diamonds, we have gold, we have timber, we have hydro to produce electricity. We still can't do that stuff. A lot of landlocked countries in Africa, they're surrounded by bad neighbors. Mm-hmm. You know, we have access to the Atlantic Ocean. So we're not surrounded by bad neighbors all the way around. We have some really shady people up by the Ivorian border, but still, we're not completely landlocked. So we have the opportunity. But you know what it is, Gabriel? You know what it is, Alex? Mm-hmm. We rely on renting our resources.
Thank you.
We are a rentier nation. We rent everything. So we don't need government to be effective. We don't need them to be efficient because the people will hold them accountable. That is the reason why Goodluck Jonathan lost the election in Nigeria, the first president in Nigeria to lose the election. Goodluck Jonathan. Why? He wasn't an effective guy.
Larry, when you say rent everything, can you explain what you mean?
We are renting our ocean to the Senegalese. Is it the Senegalese? Who are the group that is
Senegalese?
Yeah, the Senegalese.
The Senegalese.
You're right.
They kill all the fishes in their part of the world and not in their sector of the region. And now they're over there. We're renting our ocean. We're renting our mines. We're renting pretty much everything. And then we cannot put a good value. We're renting iron ore. ArcelorMittal is taking advantage of that because we don't know the true value of the iron ore. We're not collecting the resources.
Right.
So we're renting everything in the country.
Let me try to put it in context here. So 3.6% growth in the economy in 2021. Reduction in inflation from 13.1% to 6%.
That is inaccurate, though, especially the inflation part.
Yes.
Right. But anyway, go ahead. Yeah.
Then you have, so to me, when the economy is growing, inflation is coming down, it means that the prices of goods and services are also going down.
supposed to.
there is good things happening in the economy. Now you have a situation also where, I mean, if I may go by this report, your unemployment rate is about, in fact, the last time, a few years ago, when I did the calculation from what the statistical entity gave out there, Legis, they gave out there, it was almost like 87% of unemployment. So you have at least 80% unemployment. Okay. So no, it was about 81%. So it's hovering around 80%, right? So, but then you're expecting to grow by 3%, or you have grown by 3%.
I think the 3% would be adjusted. Let us get a little bit more. It will be adjusted.
Thank you, Barry. That's a great. Yeah.
In my little economic sense, I'm juggling my head. So, economic professor, please explain this thing. Inflation is going down.
I think we need to kind of put some clarity. There are two types of inflation. Yeah, so you have headline inflation and you have core inflation, right? We tend to look at core inflation because it excludes prices of things that tend to fluctuate. What goes up and down, like gasoline, food prices, they go all over the place. So when they're saying inflation is dropping, they're not being specific in telling us what type of inflation. Is it headline inflation that's falling, or is it core inflation? So again, when we started this conversation, I showed you a clear example where the president said the number of agribusiness in the country had grown exponentially in 3 weeks. I don't trust the data coming out of that place because a lot of it is flawed. It's in the president's annual message. The growth, the revenue that the president reported in his annual message that was collected in 2020 is different than the number that was reported by the central bank annual report. So there are multiple instances in the annual message where the data is just completely, it's either wrong, misleading, or it doesn't give you the source of the information. So who do you trust? The president saying the total outstanding debt, internal and external debt, is around 1.6 billion. You go to the IMF website, it's around 1.8 billion.
Yep.
Who do you trust? You trust the government? And then what makes it even more crazier is the country, the president is reporting that in the 2022 budget, think about this for a second. In 2021, they received fewer grants in 2021, around 60-something million or so he mentioned in 2021. They are projecting in 2022 budget that they expect to receive around 147 million. In 2020, you received more money. In 2021, you received less. Then in 2022, you say you're going to double the amount of grants you're going to receive. It just doesn't add up. But on the question of inflation, we can't even discuss inflation because we don't know if they're reporting core inflation or headline inflation. Are they reporting inflation, which is the change in prices? Core inflation, excluding gasoline and food prices because they tend to fluctuate, or headline inflation? So I wouldn't even fool around too much with the data on inflation. And it doesn't make any sense because when you look at the prices in the market, the prices are going up year over year. It's in the central bank report. I'm not making this stuff up, so don't get mad at me.
Yeah, according to somebody who came on the show one time, they said that the way the central bank was computing the inflation numbers was not the right way. So it was skewing more towards the Liberian dollars because, of course, the exchange rate has remained, stable for a number of time. So when you skew it towards the Liberian dollar, you get the situation you're getting. You get the inflation coming down. So whether it's core inflation or headline inflation is another thing, but it's just the way the competition according to that person. So maybe the competition, but Gabriel, because we'll come back to Larry so that he can walk us through. He said he had documented some point by point stuff from the speech itself. But then at a certain point too, we also have to not only critique, but we just have to say maybe what could be done better for our country to improve, or maybe suggestions to the government, to the president, as we are in this election time, and the ash could fall anywhere. He could win, or somebody else could win. So, what are some of the
That would
things
be a
that
travesty.
some of the things? Yeah, but when your opposition acting, they tell you
Exactly.
themselves
Right.
what you think. What you
Civil
think.
platter.
So what you think, you're giving a guy the platform to have the ability to win. So let's lead that story. So Gabriel,
Yeah.
we'll come back to Prof. Kennedy for him to give us some pointers that he has done about the speech, and then maybe we can dive into at the same time we can dive into what we think recommendations we have to give. So you go ahead. You have some things to say.
No, I think another thing I wanted to point out in the well, that was left out was the level of rape that is happening in the country, and I think Larry alluded to that in terms of crime, right? These are as supposedly what he declared himself, the feminist in
Relationship.
chief,
Yes.
right? I expected a session on that, like not just documenting the level of rape in the country, but also maybe a policy item or what you're going to do to address that level of rape in the country. You know, because women, if you call yourself the feminist in chief, right, where you want to have equity in terms in your government, those are the things. It's supposed to start with your citizen that are actually in the average citizen before you can do that within the government. But we never heard anything about that. Another thing that he pointed out that I think I think usually when we listen to these things, we don't look at the math, right? Or we don't look at the consequences, right? He talked about allocating 50% of the real estate taxes back to the respective counties, right? I think that is now if somebody says that to you, you say, great, I think I like that, right? Because that will mean revenues going to different city like Painesville or the other counties or St. Paul, right? But how many of those places outside of the central Morovia pay real estate taxes? Does that mean you're going to collect tax dollars from those cities that are doing so well and distribute it to the rest of the other cities that aren't paying so much into the real estate tax pool? Because there are not a lot of development in terms of actual, good looking properties in those other cities, right? So those are some of the things for him, that was his method for decentralizing, because they want to decentralize I don't know, the government or whatever decentralization uh, uh, law that he actually signed into law sometime last year. So that was some of the things, like you hear these things, but when you look into it, you realize those are just talking points, right? So for me, that was one of the things I wanted to talk about too. Also, he said he wanted to make this budget one of the most trends. I keep going back to this budget, right? Because a budget's supposed to outline the agenda of any administration, right? He said he want to make this budget one of the most transformative one in terms of roads, electricity, transportation, right? In addition to that, he talked about the county tours, right? 10 million allocation. Now, his reason for talking about the county tour is supposed to transform, it's supposed to bring services to the people in those counties. Like, do you guys really think, when you listen to that, what do you make of that? Because what I made of that is that this is the only form of development that you bring into these counties, right?
My
What we're
man,
looking at,
the president got to carry development to the people directly, man.
uh,
You got to
no, I'm
leave the
serious.
Ministry of Agriculture and leave the Ministry of
And if
everywhere and take the project and himself, my friend.
I usually refer people to the history of our country,
Hmm.
in terms of the economic part. What he's doing right now, in terms of saying that he want to bring these things to the county, is nothing new that any president hasn't done. Back in the day, the top men, the top bird, they used to pay the chiefs, right, as a way to buy their votes, as a way to keep them quiet. So that's the same thing that he's doing. What I expected this speech to be in actuality, you've been in power for the last 5 years. first, what I would do, I was catalog what I've done for the last 5 years. This administration has done. I will also catalog the places that I have failed. Right? You be honest with yourself, and I also want to talk to the citizen and the opposition, right, of how we can work together to better transform the interests of this country in respect of your own.
Which opposition?
let me lead, right?
They
In
want to.
respect to your own party ideology, right? You talk to the opposition of why you want them to work together. You want to work together with them to forward the interests of this country. One thing that I've come to understand is that Liberia doesn't have an interest as a nation, regardless of what political ideology you subscribe to, say CDC, ANC, LPD, or whatever the other ones that are out there. We do not have an ideology, an interest as a nation to say, regardless of I'm part of CDC, but my ideology falls in line with the interests of the country. And this is why when a president come in, they just do whatever they want, and we just accept it, right? So those are some of the things. That's what I expected him to do. Catalog your achievement, catalog also the places that you failed, right? And then appeal to the opposition of other people within your party of how you guys can work together to accomplish that, right? But what we got was a recitation, as the French people say, recitation, right? And it was more like a third grader reading, right? So that's what I got out of that. And I think the next part I want to talk about later on is the piece that talk about the debt and the level of debt that we're in. So thank you.
Okay, so that would drive us to the content, the substantive contents as Larry wants to outline. So Larry, is all yours. The next 10-15 minutes is all yours.
And I'm not going to take that long. I just want to point out.
5 minutes.
Yeah, I was just going to point out a couple of things, but Gabriel is on point. The first thing the annual message should try to do is to unify the people, to bring together unity. But there's so much political hatred going on in the country right now. The lawsuits, the trials, the different things going on. It's just kind of distracting us away from focusing on the agenda to actually help the people. The incidents of rape, like I mentioned early on, during his visit to the United Nations back in 2020, the president mentioned he was going to set up a national registry, similar to the national registry we have here in the US, where you will place people who have been convicted of rape. You'll place them in this national registry. Did we ever set up that national registry? No. We're going to set aside a special prosecutor to address incidents of rape. And this is not, of course, let me just kind of be fair and impartial here. It really it's not so much of WIA. It's been in existence for years. Going back to 2016, Madam Sirleaf even mentioned this as well in some of her speeches. So it's the country as a whole that needs to come together. Incidents of rape needs to be truly addressed. So talking about this national registry, putting it in place, putting together a special prosecutor and addressing those issues, that would be important. Right? That would be extremely important. I'm hearing some feedback. Another thing that should drive the state of the annual message is looking at the MCC scorecard. The MCC scorecard, because you're putting in place now strategies to make sure you can win the next MCC compact that comes out. What are some of the things that they failed on? They failed on fiscal policies. They failed on inflation. They're failing on regulatory equality, trade policies, government effectiveness. They failed in so many areas that I will put together policies that will address those issues. There's something over here that Emmanuel Jackson is mentioning that I'll probably bring up later. But the key thing is everyone has these great ideas on how to solve the problem in Liberia. Their problem is, how do you pay for it? That is where they get stuck. Because right now, the country's strategy to pay for these things is based on taxes and revenues from the extractive sector, all of the mining and all that stuff. So when China decides that, hey, we're not going to buy so much iron ore, the Liberian economy is going to suffer. When inflation is rising in the US, there's a saying, when the US economy sneezes, the rest of the world catches a cold, Liberian economy will be impacted. We're also relying on IMF IMF to kind of help us bail us out. And then the president made a statement about the special drawing rights was given to Liberia because of good governance. That's not entirely true. It's an asset on your books, but it's an accounting entry. It would be an asset on your book, but it's a liability somewhere else. But anyway, you're addressing the core issues. Inflation. Inflation is a poor man tax. The poor people suffer more when prices go up because a more percentage of their income goes to buying food and pay for essential services. So they suffer a little bit more. So you have to address inflation. They're bringing inflation down. Great. My hat off to the government for doing that. You take a look at education. The president mentioned education. You cannot develop your country without educating the people. It's not going to happen. The reason why Singapore, with very low natural resources, managed to develop is because Lee Kuan invested a ton of money in education. Botswana just gained their independence, in 1966. Botswana is just one of those few countries in Africa that is not receiving any IMF money. Go take a look at the IMF website. Botswana is not, they don't have any, they're not receiving IMF money that, the way how Liberia and other African countries, Kenya, Rwanda, are receiving it. He talked about terrorism. He mentioned terrorism.
Illicit finance. Yeah.
Illicit financial flows and all that stuff. If you take a look at the Treasury, the US Treasury's website, Liberia has a few businesses in there that are financing Hezbollah. Mohammed Kwansu, I think that's the name, who has a couple of businesses in Liberia. He's known to finance Hezbollah. That is critical. He also is on the list in Sierra Leone. Pay special attention to that. Then you have the situation of war crimes court. Never mentioned anything about war crimes court. That's something that needs to be rebirthed. It needs to come back and discuss as well to see how we can. If we don't get back to discussing war crimes court and bringing closure to that whole episode, we will always have incidents of people just feeling they can take, they can,
right.
Yeah, coup d'etat. Yep. That's why there's 27 coup d'etat in Haiti, and Haiti hasn't developed. So we need to address those things. People need to kind of pay the price for their actions, or we need to bring closure to that whole thing. But, let's dive into some of the core issues like education, for example. Let's talk about that. How many times did he mention education in his speech? 15 times. Alex, you mentioned that, and you and Gabriel, you guys mentioned the speech was long. If the president had stopped mentioning Mr. Speaker and he mentioned that about 43 times, he would have saved himself like 15 minutes because every time he said that. He mentioned it about 43 times.
I felt like he was speaking to the speaker at one point. Seriously.
Stop it, Mr. Speaker, and stop that little trombone guy for keep interrupting him. That would have helped as well.
That's the protocol thing. It takes 30 seconds or so to just, and sometimes when he mentioned the president pro tempore and the vice president and the speaker.
Over 40 times he did that stuff. There's no value to it,
Yeah.
Talk about education. The education part was kind of interesting because he mentioned the Claire Weir Foundation. I don't want to get too much into that because I'm not sure if the First Lady should be part of the national budget.
Absolutely not. Yeah.
But that's another conversation in itself. But I totally support what the president was talking about in education. But here's my thing. Why are we still building new schools when the ones we have, we can't even maintain?
Right.
I'm willing to even volunteer to do any type of training on education or do anything. And my hat's off to Teach for Liberia, Aileen Saba, Dr. Stefania Forte, the fundraising effort by Henry Acosta. That's huge. Teach for Liberia, great. Support that. Love the fact that Alex Cummings is doing something on his nonprofit side to help education in Liberia. Same thing. JNB also supporting efforts to help education in Liberia. So when we set politics aside and we focus on something like education, we all come together, we can do better.
Yes.
It's not by accident that Liberia remains poor. Liberia remains poor because there are people who are determined, and once we're in power, they're determined to stay in power, so they would sabotage everything else.
Yep.
Put money in education. Educate the people in the rural communities so they can feed themselves and support themselves. And finally, you talk about diversification. They want to diversify the economy, because the economy right now is focused on the extractive sector. So they want to bring some diversification. But how do you do that? I would set up maybe a couple of central banks in Liberia. For example, there are 12 Federal Reserve banks in the US. There are 12. The Federal Reserve System as a
I
whole,
think,
there's one.
yeah, Larry, we'll come to where you want the economy, where you want them to look, the improvement side of things. So, but you can start. You can continue.
Oh, so I'll just wrap up on this one.
Okay.
Diversifying the economy real quick. Of course, couple of central banks. There are 12 Federal Reserve Bank in the U.S. It starts from Boston. And how do you know? You can look at your check. You know, if you're here in the U.S., you look at your check. The U.S. system, it took years to get to where they are. We've copied pretty much everything the U.S. has, right? We've been copying it, including our anti-corruption and all the things, the central bank, all that stuff, all came from the U.S. So kind of look at the U.S. and we try to copy the best of it. So let's, and not to take up too much time because I want us to talk about some other things, but real quick, the president did well when he talked about corruption, the corruption law that, and it hasn't even been signed by the Senate. The House has kind of passed it, but the Senate hasn't really done their due diligence. When he spoke about education, totally support that as well. But the fact that he didn't focus on fighting corruption, he only mentioned it twice. One of the leading causes of the underlying factors of the Civil War. He didn't do a whole lot in that space. All right, so I'll turn it over to you, Alex.
Gabriel.
Yeah, no, I think I don't think I have anything else to say on that. I think Larry did. I think he pretty much cataloged the entire speech in terms of what's left of it, in terms of the content. I think the next part that as I said, I would like to dive into is this whole, one part of it. He mentioned that they inherited bonds from the previous administration, right? I think it was pension obligation from the previous administration, right? Which has been a burden on their administration. But to deal with that, they went and took $35 million loan from the IMF to pay out on that, right? So I want us to talk a little bit about that as well. And also in terms of the debt stock in its entirety, what we're currently paying right now on interest, and what that means for this whole, our GDP. They keep talking about growth 3.6, right? Yes, we're at 3.6. The IMF, the World Bank said we have $1.8 billion in debt. They're saying we have 1.6. There's a 200, there's a 200, $1 million difference in there, right? So there's a big discrepancy in that. Whether we are 1.6 or we're 1.8, the thing here is that our GDP is just only 3.2%, right? $3.2 billion, right? So for every dollar in GDP that we currently have, we owe 50 cents in debt. If I could speak all the 16 dialects in our country, or how many dialects, I would emphasize that in those very dialects. For every dollar,
Yeah, speak the one you know.
yeah, I don't want to hear grumble. For every dollar we have, right? We owe 50 cents in debt. So listen, I manage a huge portfolio of companies, 300, right? What the government is currently doing is what most healthcare industry do, right? Or non-healthcare industry, the medical practices, right? Or doctor practices. And this is why the IMF keep lending them money. It's called what we call the cash flow. They lend to you on a cash flow basis, right? Most doctors' offices, if you lend to them, you look at their balance sheets. At the end of the year, they take all the money out through the distribution. So if you look at the balance sheet, you say, this is a crappy practice business. I don't want to lend to it. But the only way you lend to that is because year over year, doctors' practices are profitable, right? So you're only giving them money because they have that ability to make more money every year. But at the same time, they have huge amount of debt, right? So the IMF keep giving us money, but in actuality, we keep going in debt. Yeah, what is it? The revenue, our economy is growing, right? But in that addition to that growth, it's being funded by bad debt. Now, if we were taking on this level of money, this level of debt, and investing in infrastructure, let's say roads, or even our financial system, or our education, or investment that will give us some kind of return on our investment, then I would say, yeah, these are good debt that we can take on because they are giving us more return on our debt. But that is not what is happening. So when I read through this, I was going through the speech, and he started talking about the level of debt we have, and I look at the level of GDP that we have, just over $3 billion. We're going, like, this country is becoming bankrupt. People are not noticing that. We came out of this 10 years ago in 2009, I think 2009 or 2010, when our debt was forgiven. Clean slate, right? 4 billion of it. We're almost halfway through that, just in a period of less in 10 years, right? So these are things that, I mean, in as much as everything else that I read in the speech I was listening to, this is what cringed me when I look at it as to the next, not because of this administration, but when the next person comes, what are they going to do? What are your immediate policy? What are you going to do to put air in this tire to keep rolling till you get to the next station to put a brand new tire on? What are you going to do in the immediate term, and what are you going to do in the long term to get us off of this this debt crisis that we're currently in? Nobody's talking about that, but this is a serious problem, and God forbid this administration wins a second term, because everything that they're doing right now is run by debt. They're just taking money. They're limited. Now, if they could take out more money based on their performance, they would have, right? So that is the next thing I want us to talk about. Let's dive more into that and see, I think you mentioned that, what the next administration is going to do to rectify us from this level of binging on debt, and what are they going to do in terms of building an economy that is equitable for everybody, not just few people in power or the few select group of people that know the people that are in power, but a more equitable economy where if your son get out of college today, he can get a job and take care of his family and have a decent job and take care of his family. My Mary can buy her goods, sell it, and be able to feed herself. So we can stop seeing kids in the middle of traffic hawking dry bread, gum, and these things to people that are in traffic, right? So that's the most important things I want to talk about, because at the end of the day, you and I will be okay. But what about the kids that usually you go to Liberia? That's when I'm driving traffic in Liberia. That's what gets to me. That if you are serving those people, you drive by them every day in traffic going to work, but you go for that and you come and lie to them, say the economy is doing well. But when you drive by them, they're not benefiting from that growth that you're actually talking about. So that's what I want to talk about. Thank you.
Yeah, what I generally don't like generally is the reference to previous administration. So I mean, the government is continuity. Okay, so
Right.
even when the president is giving a major speech like this, and you still want to pivot on previous administration, I mean, there's a different way. Even if you want to talk about previous administration, there's a way. Say if something is continuing, yeah, then you speak to it to that direction. But everything to either blame or to throw shade at the previous government, then it begs the question to me now, then why did you come to power? You came to power, on the basis of change for hope, right? Or hope for change. Either way around. So why is through the government's continuity? So whatever the last government started in terms of the good stuff, you inherited the good stuff, and you were moving with it. They're being implemented. Projects that they secure funds for, you took them and you're completing them and dedicating them and taking the positive. But when it comes to some negativity, then you want to pivot back and say you blame. So that I don't like generally, because it's like you meet a girl and the other guy was treating her bad and you took her. Then something happened. Oh, that's the reason why that guy was treating you bad, or
Right.
don't bring it to me. That guy did not do this. That guy did not do that. No, that's why you took the girl from a guy. That's why you fought to get the girl. And so you got to treat her, better than what the situation she have. You have to improve the situation that is going on. You got to, take the good and run with it, and take the bad and fix it. But I like one of the things I like, Prof. Kennedy mentioned a lot of stuff, but let me just highlight one or two things. I like the fact that he talked about the scorecard. The reason is because if you pay attention to the scorecard and you form a secretariat or a group to kind of monitor the implementation of the different aspects of the scorecard, not only the government will be making a pass next time around, but the government can be making a lot of improvement in a lot of areas. Okay, I thought that Weir is the guy who embodied unity and reconciliation for the country based on what he did during the war and all that with the UNICEF and all that stuff, putting the war people and the war children together, all that stuff. I thought one of his biggest things should be unity and reconciliation. And time over time, that has been missing even in his action and in the speeches and things like that, unifying the country. And unifying the country has to do with a lot of little things, even things like what we're talking about, the issue of rape. It impinges on reconciliation. The issue of all these hate messages, campaign would be hard. Don't get me wrong. Campaign would be hard. People will get at each other. But generally, over the past years, there's been this, and it used to be, they hit the president or they hit this person, they hit the government. But the hate is also coming back to the people who were supposed to be hitting the president. And it's so the hate is all over the place. So, some of these things that, like this kind of speech, reconciliation, unity should be part of it. Even though towards the end, he made this what appears to be just a statement about from peace reigned in the country from Wulogisi to this place, which was just a statement. But the speech itself, there was not a portion of the speech, on nothing about rule and they did not hammer the issue of rule of law, which is one of the biggest problems in our country, right? Rule of law. Yes, he talked about the almost 29 or almost 30 person that died in Nikutan. That's a good thing to mention that. But the growing issue of our disadvantaged youth, which we call Zobo. So I would like to say disadvantaged youth that are in there. What is causing this? It could go to a stage where it will be difficult to repair, because the basis of all that is mental health. Are we addressing mental health? How many times did the president talk about in the portion on health? Did he mention mental health? Did he talk about the issues that are confronting the Zogos? When we come to rule of law, what is the issue? Part of that mental health has to do with drugs, the intake of drugs. Where is the drug coming from? We have to go to the source. Who are the people that are bringing the drug into the country? Who are the people that are selling the drug, that are making our children to take this drug and get bold to hold cutlasses in their hand, to threaten people for their phones and other things to because when they're high, that's when they get the boldness from to go and attack somebody.
Carry out these heinous crimes
or stuff like that. So, taking people's phones from in the street and scaring people to the extent that these days we hear that people, because certain areas of the place is dark after 8 o'clock, people don't venture out there. So it creates a sense of security. It creates a national security
threat. Yeah.
So this is something that I expected for the president to hammer down on, and not just talking in speech, but also up to now there should be something that has been established. You have people working, not different people brought in to be paid, but the same people that are working in the government say, hey, you lead this effort, lead that effort. We see in countries sometimes they will appoint the vice president or this person, this other, minister or deputy minister to lead this effort on this issue. How do we go down to the nitty-gritty? Yes, he talked about corruption and illicit, finance, but this issue of giving the LACC, the Liberia Anti-Corruption power to go straight to the court, prosecutory power, has been on the table, right? But yet we see all these different audit reports and all these different things that are happening in the country.
And no prosecution.
How many times have we prosecuted people? Have we taken people to court? How many times have we even confiscated properties or instrumentality of crime? How many times, right?
Yeah, so if you go into compare your administration and previous administration, that's one example of where you can say, hey, in my administration, we have prosecuted X number of people for corruption.
Yep.
You don't just do the comparison to say, hey, they were stealing, so we're going to steal too. Then that's not good comparison. But yeah, go ahead, Alex.
Yeah. So what has been done? Yeah, you can change the law. That law proposal for amendment is being there since previous government. Yeah, if he puts it into place, if it's passed this year and approved, yeah, kudos, right? Kudos to him. But we're talking about effectiveness here, right? We're not talking about technical compliance. We're talking about effectiveness. You can make all the laws for what we care, but what is the implementation? How many people, investigations have been conducted? How many people went to court? How many people were found guilty? How many property was confiscated? Recently, Councillor Johnson resigned from the asset recovery team that was set in place. I heard it on one of these online podcast program that apparently he left out of frustration that he was not getting the kind of support that you get from the power that be.
But you come out here and talk about those things. So you see the discrepancy there, right?
Yeah. So if somebody who is seen as your quote unquote as one of your anti-corruption czar for a group of lawyers that was established to recover billions dollars of asset is resigning out of frustration. What work has this done so far? Yeah, they put few names, they have few press conferences and brought few names, but sometimes some of those names they bring out is politically motivated or they're just trying to go after somebody. But institutionally, especially the big ticket items, those big monies that I can go ahead and name them, but sometimes I'm a little guided by the work that I do. So, but there are a lot of cases that are there. Previous administration, current administration, that should go to court. So talking about just passing a law and giving LACC, it's the same thing. You can go to the court if the court is corrupt. The case would they will manipulate the case and they will get the verdict that they desire. But again, so
in terms of the debt and borrowing money, Darling over here made a statement, said they're borrowing money so they can divide it amongst themselves. It seems that way, right? That they actually divided the money amongst themselves, and they seem to be living a good life. The Liberia government is just that one sector where people can start from a poor beginning, enter government, and become wealthy overnight. And that is the issue of some of the underlying factors in terms of why you have countries going into the civil crisis and protesting and all that stuff. Is because the economy doesn't seem fair. And I can remember years ago, two things real quick. In terms of fighting corruption, human nature, by nature, people would try to do what is always best for them, whether it involves being corrupt to benefit themselves as opposed to thinking about others. I'll give you an example. In a bank, there was a guy working in the cash management section. He went to purchase a house in New Jersey, one of the rich sections in New Jersey called Moorestown. He was making around $66,000, and he went to purchase a house worth around $560,000. Highly unusual. Your salary doesn't match the type of house you're looking to buy. So the law in the U.S. makes it mandatory for certain reporting. Certain transactions taking place needs to be reported. When it was reported to the government reached out to us over at JP Morgan and say, hey, this guy's buying a house for a little over $500,000. He only makes $60-something thousand. What's the deal? After we started looking at the records and stuff, we found out that he worked in the cash management department. He was actually stealing money. He was wiring money, but the system didn't catch it. It was only the fallback system, the government's fallback system that caught that. So the president mentioned in his speech using technology to prevent, which is great, to prevent corruption. But we see instances of blatant corruption. Catching the people who are corrupt without prosecution is a waste of time.
Yeah,
it's an absolute waste of time. If prosecution is meant to deter, to prevent people from doing it in the future, that's what it's meant for. But there's been kind of zero prosecution, right? So it kind of goes away. And I saw something else that Darling wrote in here. The economy is not fair for everyone. Plain and simple. I can remember a speech that Vonnie Sherman gave years ago where he said he was walking down Broad Street and he saw a young kid sitting on a rock down on Broad Street, and he looked at the kid and said, I don't believe this kid will ever rise up to the level that I, Vonnie Sherman, have risen up in this country. Because the system is just not fair and equal for everyone. That's a profound statement. It tells you it's difficult. The chances of someone living in a rural part of Liberia to make it is less than 1%. Yep. The economy is not fair. The president said it in his inaugural message. The economy was going to be where we're going to be spectators in our economy. Are we even in the stadium? I don't know. So, and then another thing I see someone mention here in the chat. Another thing they mentioned real quick.
Yeah, Larry, please call the person's name to recognize the person.
Let me see. I think it's William Broad, the last name. I think I saw it somewhere up there where William mentioned that I think the international community is trying its best to kind of keep poor countries or African countries in debt. Let me touch on this real quick. Debt by itself is not bad. It depends on what you do with the money that you borrow that is so important. The U.S. has trillions of dollars in debt. Who holds the U.S. debt? A little small, tiny. China is ranked number 2. China holds a little over $1 trillion in U.S. debt. Japan holds $1.2 trillion in U.S. debt. You'll be surprised to know the United Kingdom holds around 300 or something million in U.S. debt. A small country like Luxembourg, ranked number 4 in terms of U.S. debt. The U.S. borrow a ton of money. The U.S. over the past maybe 50 years or so, the U.S. 40 years, the U.S. hasn't really balanced their budget. There have only been 2 instances where the U.S. has actually balanced their budget. They borrow a lot of money, but what do they do with that money? And how do they finance the debt? This is where we have the issue in Liberia. We don't have a way to finance the debt. How do we finance the debt? We get money from the IMF. We rely on money from the extractive sectors. We don't have a sound financial system. The central bank, how do the U.S. finance their debt? They use 4 instruments from the Federal Reserve Bank. They use treasury bills, treasury notes, treasury bonds, and something called TIPS, Treasury Inflationary Protected Securities. Yep. Liberia, we don't have that. I saw a couple of ministers and someone from LBDI.
Is that the guy you're talking about, William?
That's the comment.
Yeah, it was earlier. I think he started. He was something. He probably said it earlier too, but that's the person who it is, and he's making some very good comments. I wish we would kind of look at some of the comments because he's mentioning things like agriculture, electricity.
Yeah, we started looking at it now. He said, leave that school theory of the economy doesn't work like that with the new world order. Poor countries will always be in debt because that's one of the means for the powerful countries to control the poor countries. If you come in as a leader and want to stop that, the ignorant population that are in majority will get you out of power quickly, and they will be supported by the same developed countries.
Oh, he's right. That is profound.
I would agree to parts of it and disagree with other parts of it in terms of, because I believe we have free will. We can choose whether we want to do this or that. But if you try to change things, the people that be in power, they will stop you. They will remove. They will run you out of town. Mm-hmm. They will run you out of town. Countries do borrow money, but they don't spend all their money on recurring expenses.
Yeah, but so there's a counter to that from Patrick Kekula.
Put that up.
If you can bring it up, yeah.
So William, you said William said, you said he should leave the school theories of economic, but the reason you stated is geopolitical. Every country, even the developed economy, borrow money, which is true. It is important to borrow money for investment, not to beef up expenditure.
Patrick is
I
on
think that's
point.
what you were saying.
That's what I was just saying. I didn't even see his comment. Patrick
Right.
is on point. You borrow money to invest in education, to invest in agriculture. You have to feed yourself. You don't borrow money to take for private to have a private jet fly you over to a Zoom conference in France. You don't do that stuff. I'm sorry. I'm being cynical. I will stop.
But that's true. It's not cynical. That's fact.
I would stop.
So I like a comment from Darling Wayward. It said mental health. I think the person was talking about what I was talking about. So mental health is 0.003 of the issues with the disadvantaged youth. There are no opportunities for the youthful population. They are always left out of the economy. I also think that some government officials are using the disadvantaged youth to do their dirty work. Dalek, you were correct. I mean, you added to what I was saying, but mental health is one of it. Yes, it's true. But the fact that and we had a conversation before, some of them myself, like in some countries where even they have this no child left behind policy and this transit thing where, because once they say that the mind is the devil's workshop. Once you leave a youth idle, he doesn't have schools to go to. His parents don't have money to take him to school and all that stuff. The next thing you do is he's getting involved in things that he's not supposed to get into, and hence the end result is he takes drugs, and because he's idle, he follows peer pressure and take drugs, and even mental health can also come from the fact that he's not doing anything. He's idle every day. Doesn't even have food to eat. I mean, older people can also fall prey to that because, in fact, the Zogos thing is not just young people. There are some old people among there. There are some well-educated guys among them. Some people who have graduated from high school. Some people from good family who are part of the Zogo thing, but because they fell prey to drugs. So it's a combination of factors.
Yeah.
Then
let me touch on that real quick before you jump to my comment. Back in 2013, Madam Sirleaf said the number, and this is 2013, she said the number of unemployed youth in our country is a serious risk to national security. That is significant because Jonas Savimbi, when he was running that whole thing back in Angola, UNITA, and remember that the U.S. was using Liberia as a base to send support over to what was going on in that part of the world. Jonas Savimbi said, all I need is just $10,000 and I can take over this country. Why was he saying that? Because the number of unemployed young people in the country was so high, he didn't need a lot of money to put them on the streets.
Yep.
And then he said, once he gets to the capital, he will be able to they were relying on the extractive sector. He will be able to cut deals with people who are investing in the country to remove the government. How many people in Liberia right now would be willing to go protest, would be willing to leave their job if they had jobs to go stand on the street to protest? They're only doing it because the number of unemployed youth in the country is extremely high. Create jobs. They won't have to be out there. But how do you create jobs? Again, it goes back to what was mentioned earlier, what Darling mentioned. You create jobs, you will borrow the money, but you use the money to invest in your people.
Future growth, right?
Future growth. You don't take a look at the 2020 annual message or the 2020 budget. Only 5% of the budget was used for private sector investment. The rest was just recurring expenditures, scratch cards, whole lot of stuff that doesn't lead to development. That's why the country, for 3 years in a row, the economy fell.
Yeah,
it fell. So go ahead, Alex. You can talk about the next comment.
Yeah, we'll talk about the next question, but just to add to what you're saying, at the end of the front page Africa story, it says, the last sentence there says, the government of Liberia makes no savings and contributes later to the financing of its own public investment. So that's as revealed by the World Bank report. So Tokwa Query say, did you discuss the 1.6 billion debt and future projection of 2.15 billion by 2025, an issue with financing debt? Wolokoli appeared on the popular show and said that government of Liberia might forfeit debt obligation.
Let me touch on that before Gabriel comes in, because Gabriel touched on this, and I want to touch on it real quick. Your debt to GDP ratio, meaning, let's say, for example, in basic language, let's say all the money you're bringing in is $500. The money you owe is $250. Your debt to the total money you're bringing in is half of that, right? Every time you increase that debt, the chance of you being able to make payments, it becomes worse. You might miss a payment or so. You want to reduce your debt. The debt to GDP ratio in places like Botswana right now is under 20%. The debt to GDP ratio in Liberia is over 50%. It's approaching close to 60%. That's a big problem. Now, not everybody who has a high debt to GDP ratio is at risk. For example, the debt to GDP ratio in Japan is around 247%. But Japan can afford it. Remember now, Japan is sitting on 1.2 trillion of U.S. debt. Japan purchased. They are lending $1.2 trillion to the American government. So Japan's debt to GDP ratio being 247%, it's fine. I mean, it's not great, but it's sustainable.
Right.
Liberia can't sustain it because right now, Liberia cannot even make the current payments because of COVID. They're in a program set up by the IMF called the Debt Suspension Program. So debt payment right now has been suspended. It is bound to expire, I think, in April of this year. So they will have to start making those payments. You should be worried because if they borrow a lot of money, if they were to ever miss a payment, the IMF will withhold lending them any more money. And the fact that we're depending on the IMF for all these loans and stuff, that's going to be a major problem when you cannot get any more money from the IMF. So we should be concerned. So what the comment you just have up there, that's critical because the second we miss a debt, we have been at risk of missing it. We have been at risk of missing it. And they've been reaching out to the IMF and asking to kind of reduce the requirement to avoid missing the debt payment. We should be concerned. We have a 2022 budget coming out of a little over, how much was it? 700 and something million?
185.
They intend to borrow at least around 145 million in that budget to balance the budget.
So the guy said, Stephen, I was going to read that comment. People got more jobs in America than people willing to work, but they still protest. It just depends on what the issue is.
He's absolutely correct. There are people protesting in Hong Kong. The Hong Kong dollar is far more valuable than the US dollar. Hong Kong is doing extremely well. But why are the people protesting in Hong Kong? Because mainland China is trying to come in there, grab citizens without giving them a day in court. So it depends on the issue. You are absolutely correct. Black Lives Matter in America.
Yeah, I think that person is responding to a comment made when we're talking about the Zogo issues about, I think somebody made the fact that because they're adult, they're being used for demonstration and things like that. So I think that was a counter argument that person was putting up. All right. So it's only because they're adults. So even places where people work, they stay protest depending on the issue. I think that's the person was trying to stress down there. So we'll begin to wind down once we take this, after we take these comments, and then we give our
another comment here.
We'll close.
So if you can't create jobs in your economy, this is from Emmanuel Jackson. If you can't create a job in your economy, you can build technology infrastructure to have transfer of jobs from developed countries, economies like India, Philippines, Latin America are doing, and transferring jobs from the US. All right. I think what he's referring to, like you see these remote work, there's a platform called Upwork, right? Where you can hire like a graphic designer in India, in Lithuania to do your work. If we had, what he means, if you had that level of technology, right? Or even call centers. If we had technology, we can set up a big call center and partner with one of these giant bank or even, Amazon or whatever to be able to handle their call center. So we can leverage technology. It all depends, as I said, and I think this is what we all keep saying. Who's in power, what your agenda is, what's your the interest of the country is, where you want to be as a country. I think I keep saying this thing. as a country, we need an agenda, like an interest. We got to have a collective interest. So regardless of who comes in power, yes, your ideology of this is how I want to get there might be different from, let's say Alex or Will, right? But at the end of the day, we're still getting to that same goal, right? We still want the same answer, but we don't have that. It all depends who in power to be able to do these things. So I'll rest on that note.
So, gentlemen, let me just kind of put something up, and Larry and you guys feel free to chime in with this, okay? So, this is from the central bank. This is the Liberian statistics. I picked up 3 commodities that we're known for. We're known for rubber, palm oil, and iron ore. And this is reflected in Liberian dollars in billions, obviously. But the gray represents iron ore. And these numbers are most current only until June 2021. So we can have another conversation about why we don't see the most recent numbers now that we're in 2022. But that's for another day. So here, what we see is that we're kind of trending upwards on these 3 commodities: rubber, palm oil, and iron ore. And the question is this: even if these items were to continue increasing, will it improve the economic situation of Liberia, or are these numbers just represent capital flights, money going out, and money going to the wrong pockets, or money being allocated to the wrong way?
Yeah, I can start, Gabriel, if you want me to.
Yeah, go ahead.
So first of all, I would not rely on the belief that it will continue to rise for 2 reasons. Number one, Firestone, which is actually owned by a Japanese company, Bridgestone.
Yeah,
Firestone is actually owned by Bridgestone, right?
Yep.
Firestone has invested in a plant somewhere in Arizona to, rather than rely solely on the rubber that we find in Liberia, they're looking to start investing more in synthetic rubber.
Mhm.
So they may at some point start reducing their reliance on natural rubber and move more to synthetic rubber.
What does that leave us?
Exactly. So you can't rely fully on this just trending upward. So what you need to be doing now is start thinking, hey, how do I diversify my economy and start relying on something like that? Iron ore. The price of iron ore has fluctuated. You're looking at a 3-year span, but if you look at iron ore over a longer period of time, you would see the price of iron ore have fluctuated. Iron ore price was rising simply because the Chinese economy was growing. But there have been some issues right now because of pollution and some other things and climate change and all those conversations that China is going to probably start reducing its level of development at some point. And the price of iron ore is expected to fall. Liberia economy took a huge hit when iron ore fell a few years ago. So the second part to your question is, how would the people benefit from the resources, from the natural? Over the years, the people really haven't benefited from their resources. It hasn't shown anywhere. They haven't benefited at all. Is it expected to change? Well, it hasn't really changed since this government came in place, and Madison Leaf didn't do a great job as well in terms of using the resources to help the people a lot. So what we need to start looking at is, what else can we do to help the people? Let's take a look at tourism. Tourism has a downstream effect. We don't have highly skilled, and I wanted to touch on my brother Emmanuel Jackson's point. We don't have highly skilled labor, but in tourism, you need the manpower. You can train people in tourism. So we need to diversify the economy. So I'm not going to put my faith in the government actually taking the money from natural resources and kind of spending it they do put a portion of it. In the president's speech, he mentioned that as a portion of the budget, I think he said something about 14% or so of the budget is spent in education. Mm-hmm. But is it quality education? How are we benefiting from that? Right. It doesn't show. Because what percentage of the people cannot read a fitting sentence according to USAID? Right. over 52% of the population is illiterate. You can't grow the economy. And to go back to Emmanuel Jackson's point, the first wave of globalization, China was prepared. Why? They invested in education. Over at JP Morgan, what did we do? We exported our reconciliation to Bangalore over in India. A lot of the accounting, the guys are 8.5 hours ahead of us. And there were instances we had to call and wake up vice presidents over there because something was out of whack. But India invested heavily in education. A lot of the technology, systems repair and stuff has been exported to Singapore and Philippines. Singapore now is a financial hub. Why? Because Lee Kuan came in, he invested in education. I said early on, I'm happy the president's going to put money in education. But we need to educate the people. We need to invest in internet. Alphabet, the parent company of Google, right now, if you take a look around Monrovia, there are people over there with shovels trying to bury the fiber optics cable. That is nonsense. Why don't you put some heavy equipment down there to help speed that thing up?
Yeah.
You know, fiber optics hit Liberia since 2013 from Gabon. Where are we today? Matters of Relief didn't do anything to it. This government needs to do something about it right away, because you can increase GDP by at least 2 to 3 percentage points by investing in technology. Now you can talk about doing a call center in Liberia because you have the internet to support that. Where can you get the money from? Take a look at Liska. Liska is ripping off the Liberian government. If you take a look, over 100.
That's a topic by itself. That is, oof.
They're ripping off the
Actually, I
Liberian
will bring you
government.
on for that. That's a topic by itself. Oof.
You can raise the money to student loan. You need to recapitalize. You need to set up student loan programs, but you can't set up student loan programs if people cannot get a job after completing college. So you need to build your financial sector, right? Build your financial sector, have financial instruments, and you can find the money. We can't rely solely on USID, because USID, there are 5 companies right now that tend to win a lot of the USAID contracts. So the money goes into Liberia and then it turns right around and leaves Liberia.
Yep.
You know, so when you look at remittances, you see money flying out of Liberia. Why? Because a lot of the development projects are being won by American companies.
And
So
if I may add to that real quick.
After that, because we got to wind down here.
Yeah.
Before we do
If
that,
I may add to that real quick.
Mhm.
One of the reasons why we can depend on those, like, you know, natural resources like the iron ore. I'm sure you guys are seeing like the development of the electric cars, right? The electric cars, what they use battery. They're lighter. They take less iron than the normal car. Like if you're driving a Tesla and it's windy, right? It seems as if like the car is trying to blow, the wind is trying to blow you, because there's less iron in that car, right? So the further and the trend that is happening right now, more cars production are going into the electric car, you know, industry. Every vehicle, every car manufacturing company, right? So that means less demand for iron ore, right? And if your economy is dependent on iron ore to survive, guess what? You're going to see volatility, huge, not just volatility, but one that is just going downward. The biggest producer of oil in the world, Saudi Arabia. What are they doing right now? They're diverse. These people have oil for centuries, but they're diversifying away from the oil because they know it is not sustainable. You cannot have those things for. What we need to do is leave this extractive industry alone. Like I think Larry talked about the rubber, where, you know, we're now looking at synthetic rubber, right? What are we going to do when those people move to synthetic rubber? You know, what are we going to do when there's less demand for iron? The fact that all these car manufacturers are now going into electric vehicle that take battery and demand less iron, right? So we have to start looking at way to diversify the economy, right? So I just wanted to put that out there.
So as we closing down, you will have the time in your closing statement to give, you know, something like how we can, because that's something that we should have come to on recommendation and how we can improve, but we didn't. But according to our program too, we'll be having different segment subsequent to this one. I think for the month of February or so in March, we'll be looking at the economy and ways we can improve. So we'll be having a policy dialogue and things like that, how we can make recommendation to the government on ways they can improve the economy and different aspects of the economy, whether it's the restructuring of the budget, whether it's the fiscal policy, whether it's the monetary policy, whether it's agriculture, whether it's tourism. We will be bringing different people on to discuss this topic, but more focus on not just the talking, but the critiquing and then making recommendation to what you critique, so that we develop a policy document where the government can do that. But I would like to recognize some people who are listening. If we don't call all of them, we stay recognized, because there are so many people here. My colleague Wule, Emmanuel Jackson, Darling Waywood, William W. Slim King Bro, Swa Mapu, Patrick Kimba Kekula, Elder Zachariah Roberts, Margaret A. Mapu Dason, Tokpa Kwewu, Stephen Elsa, Ambassador Kessley Gayflor Jr., Agatha Shelley, William Dunbar, and then Francis C. Wilson, Samuel Shepard. Agatha says, so Agatha says something about talking, everybody just talking, like us talking. So thank you all for tuning in and your great comments so far. If I didn't call your name, you're recognized, and thank you for your comment. Thank you for those who were listening and those who will listen later on. William, what's your parting comment?
Thank you very much. From everything that was said, something that stood up, and I think Larry Kennedy mentioned it, but he didn't go in depth about it, and it's something that deeply concerns me, which is that Liberians, we don't have a stakehold, or we're not stakeholder in our economy. All of the international organizations or all of the businesses that are in Liberia at this moment, we should have at least set aside 30 or 40% ownership share to Liberians. If we own a share in LISC as Liberians, I think then some of those profits will be coming to us, right? And I think we want to be given that opportunity, because regardless of whatever happens, if we're not at the table, then we're just pretty much collecting those little royalties and so forth, and it doesn't do much. So in my closing statement is that yes, we're in a situation where even if the economy does grow and continues to grow, even at an exponential rate, unless we are partakers and stakeholders and owners in our Liberian economy, then we're just going to be in serious trouble, and we're going to witness serious capital flight.
Yeah.
Thank you. Gabriel?
Yeah, no, thank you, Larry. Thank you for taking the time to come, for joining us. And for those in the cyberspace, thank you for joining us. We will see you next Saturday. For me, I think the most important thing here, I want to stick it to the state of the nation, right? It's one thing to come and paint a rosy picture, but it's one thing to take that rosy picture and reflect it back to the citizen in the country, right? And for us, when we look at that, the state of the nation, and we look at what is happening in the country, not just
Gabriel, I'm cutting you over. Somebody said the president didn't even drink water. Drink a 2.35. 2 hours and 35 minutes.
How much anxiety he had.
I keep drinking my water because just 1 hour and 30 minutes of talking, I keep drinking my water.
You're right. You kind of.
I'm sorry for cutting you off. We can continue.
Maybe that was the best part of the speech. No, honestly, I think if you look at the picture that you were painting, I think, as in some of you guys pointed out, it should have been a unifying message. But in actuality, I think he should have cataloged all the last 5 years, given he has about a year left to go, right? He should have cataloged his development, his accomplishment. He should have also cataloged, be honest with yourself, and catalog the places you fell short, and then really appeal to whether the opposition or the people across the aisle to say, this is where I want you to work with me to get across, to further, the interests of this country. But one thing that is true about us as Liberia, or Liberians, the country does not have a national interest. Like as a collective nation, like what do we want to do in the next 5 years? What do we want to be from an economic, infrastructure, technology? Where do we want to be globally? If we look at ourselves in a competitive region, right? Where do we want to be as a nation in the next 5 years, 10 years, 50 years, 100 years from now? Where do we see ourselves, right? We can look at our past glory. Liberia was one point, as people keep telling, my mother will have this conversation with me. People used to come to Liberia from West African country to go to school because we had one of the best education, right? That's past glory. That doesn't exist anymore, right? We're one of the pioneers country of Pan-Africanism, right? Part of it was birthed in our country. Those are some of our history. So to say this, what I'm trying to say here is that we need a national agenda interest as a country from an economic or whatever way you want to look at it, right? And regardless of what aisle of the party that you're on, whether it's CDC, ANC, and all these other satellite parties, where regardless of who comes to power, we have to build towards that. We have to build towards that. And I mean collectively. We're a poor nation, right? As bad as it is, the good thing about that, we can look at how the other developed country build, right? Where they have a lot of inequality right now. We can build a more inclusive economy where everybody in our country can benefit. If you don't want to do well, that means because you don't want to, you shouldn't want to work, right? So for me, this is what I keep looking for in every administration. I just became active, in talking about politics in Liberia. So, but when you look back at the history of this country, you see the continuity of everything that we've done before still being perpetuated, So what I look for in the next administration, the person that will come in, be able to understand the things that are happening in this country, take it from there, look at it from a short-term standpoint, but also have a long-term plan to put this country on where it needs to be 5, 10, 20, 50, 100 years from now. And even if you leave, that when somebody come, they will say, the platform was so set up, was so great, I can just pick bit and pieces of it and take this thing to the next level. That's my advice to either this administration or the next person that will come in there. Thank you.
Well, I would like to close with comments from Agatha Shelley, and also apologize to Dyson for if we didn't pronounce her name very well.
She's kind of sensitive about that.
Yeah, so Agatha Shelley said Liberian men and women know how to talk sweet all the time, like Larry, Gabriel, and
I
Alex.
didn't say anything to her. Why should she say how sweet talking her?
I think she meant she meant it from a good spot, but Emmanuel Jackson came and said, no, we have to keep talking, our people. Yes, we have to keep talking, because if there's some saying they say what, when good, and I think bad triumph when good men or good human beings keep quiet or something like that. I don't know that parable very well. So, or if good people do nothing, then bad will triumph. So we got to keep talking and everything else. And so we will continue the show going forward. Like I said, we'll be diving more into substantive recommendation, looking at the different aspect of our economy and different aspect of our country, and making.
Can I part with 30 seconds?
Yes, go ahead.
So I want to thank you, Alex, Gabriel, William, and the Focus on Liberia family for having these conversations. It's so important for us to have these conversations because we can learn from each other. We can see what it is that we're doing wrong and hopefully learn from that to do something better. Because there's really, and like I said when we first started, I'm always concerned and trying to understand why Liberia, what are the causes of poverty in Liberia, and what can we do to solve that? There's really no reason for Liberia to be poor. There were other countries that were poorer than us that came and have done extremely well, and we talk about them all the time. So we can do better. The annual message is meant to bring hope. It's meant to talk about the economy, how well the economy is doing. It's meant to put out the policies, what the president intends to do for the coming year as well. what I noticed that was missing, importantly, and to just kind of wrap up real quick, was we don't have hope that every Liberian in there has a fair opportunity to do well. That was kind of missing. I also talk about the infighting amongst the political parties right now. We need to kind of change that because it's too vicious right now. There's no unity amongst us. I kind of discounted the annual message because just by looking at it, I saw 2 blatant errors in those reports. And that tells me that the data in the report is completely wrong. It's not so much also in terms of how large your budget is going to be, but what you intend to do with the money once you raise it. I know they're going to have a massive budget shortfall. That's inevitable. But what are they going to do with the money that they intend to raise? Will everybody get a fair shake in terms of will everybody enjoy that money? Probably not. It's going to go to a few, like someone mentioned early on. So yeah, let's have these conversations. I'm always willing to learn. No, knowledge is not something that one person has a monopoly on. It's something that we all try to share, have these conversations, and do better. Again, thanks so much to the Focus on Liberia family for having these conversations, and hopefully I can be part of your future conversations, guys.
Once again, as we close, I'd like to thank everybody who on the show. We once again continue to thank Gabriel, Professor Kennedy for coming on. We'll be bringing you on again when we talk about the substantive economic issues, practical issues that affect our country. Thank you, William, for being in control, and we'd like to say thanks to Anthony and Dennis, the big guys in the background. Again, I also like to close finally by saying, again, rest in peace, Mr. Edward Doe. Emmanuel Jackson reminded me here. I was saying, in fact, that's why we didn't have the show last time, because we were all traveling. I was going to Virginia for his memorial service with his parents, because we all, Edward's a big brother. When I was Peking, small ball, in the academic area, we look up to people like Edward Doe those days. So I grew up with them. I was in their house almost every time. Augustine Doe, Michael Doe. That's a family I grew up with. So I had to go there to Virginia. Whilst on my way, then my connecting flight got canceled in Charlotte, North Carolina. So I had to sleep over. That's why we didn't have the show the last time. So I went there. We had we met the mother. She was so happy. I mean, she doesn't see properly, but she mentioned me by name. She talked about my sister. She talked about my brother. She talked about the connection with the family. And she was so happy that we went, and she was so relieved. So, peace. May his soul rest in peace, Edward Doe. Once again, my sympathy to the family, and on behalf of the Focus on Liberia family, because he was one of our contributors.
Yeah.
Bye-bye, peace, and have a good rest of the weekend. We know it's cold around the state. There's a winter blaze in the East Coast. And,
I'm going to grab the snow blower right now. I'll see you guys later.
Having, I know, 1/4 inch of snow, they're worrying like that. But so, peace to everybody. When we say Minnesota, it's more cool.
Yeah, so I guess we'll part on that note, on the usual closing song that we are all Liberians, So I don't know who's taking us home.
Thank you very much.
You go, William.
I'm going to take it on whether you like the speech, whether you didn't like the speech, whether you like the band, you didn't like the band, whether the growth in that economy was something that you were able to touch and see and feel, or whether you. Yeah, they say Gabriel is just for the girls,
for the other gender.
Exactly. So,
what?
Yeah, whether you are just for the female gender or the male gender, remember this: the economy is for all of us, and at the end of the day, we are all Liberians. And so,
all the female, all the other gender, they're praising the man, my man.
Yeah,
I'll show that go home.
So anyway, take it home.
We are Liberia. Liberia is our